gonna look at the camera briefly.
She knows, people. She knows. She's aware of everything.
Or two things.
Well, it's the two things
I'll
that
pick
matter.
two.
We're enough to make it.
Yeah. So, thank you guys for filling in for Tom. This is super exciting. We are, just for the people watching, we are live on Alpha Greek Video, but not radio, because for some reason that ain't working. And we are live on diamondclub.fm and diamondclub.tv and the YouTubes and all the things. So really just spectacular liveness. So I say we just go. And I will fade down the music at some point, Patrick. Like, you jump in when you wish. I'll fade it down so it's definitely not over you.
All right.
Then,
So I let the
we'll see
music
what
go and
happens.
then fade in.
Yeah.
I start speaking and we see what happens.
Yes, and also I'm not doing any other music cues in show than the open and the close.
Ah,
Because
all right.
it just creates garbage, and then I could just put it in post after really simply.
Excellent.
So just when you go from headlines, when you go into headlines, just a breath. Just leave a breath for me. And then when you finish news from you, just leave a breath for me. And then I'll play you out with the headline music and all the post stuff.
Excellent.
All right, let's do this.
Let's.
I wish I was born ready, but I just know that you are.
You know, I could even do it live.
It's your
I
show.
was born ready.
All right, disappearing.
All right. I'm sticking around for a second, and then I'll disappear. Okay, here we go.
This is the Tech News Show for Tuesday, June 9, 2015. I'm Patrick Beja, trying to fill in for Tom Merritt, who is out on assignment, and I hear his parents are proud. Iyaz Akhtar is here to help me fill the void left in our heart by Tom Merritt's absence. I'm not sure we're going to manage. Tom has a pretty sizable place in our hearts, I'm going to say. How are you doing, Iyaz? How do you think our chances of filling in for Tom successfully are?
I'm doing pretty well. I'm getting more and more terrified the more I think of the concept of filling in for Tom. I'm just going to think of it this way. That Tom's on the episode, but very, very quiet for some reason.
Excellent. Yeah, that will help us deal with his absence indeed. You know what? We did want to talk about Apple nonstop for the entirety of the episode, but the combined might of the producing team and all of our bosses decided that we shouldn't. So we're going to go ahead and discuss headlines as we usually would, and have a different topic at the for the discussion topic, which is not Apple, unfortunately, but will be interesting nonetheless. Let's start with the headlines. Major Nelson has revealed that Microsoft has released a new Xbox One console. Very exciting, except, well, not really. It's just a variant that includes a 1 terabyte hard drive, new matte finish, a newly designed Xbox One wireless controller, and in select regions, Halo, the Master Chief Collection, which presumably finally works. The new controller will feature a 3.5mm stereo jack, so you can plug in a headset directly into the controller, with settings for volume, voice, and game balance, and mic level in the console's menu setting. That's as opposed to the proprietary jack that the old controller had. The updated console will ship June 16th, so right after the start of E3, in the US and select markets for $400. You can also buy the controller separately for $60, or in special edition covered forces that look badass in silver and black for $65. The price of the current 500 gigabytes console will now drop to $350.
So Patrick lied a little bit. We're going to talk a tiny bit about Apple because there's some clarifications and some nuggets about yesterday's WWDC. Recode clarified that Apple Music will support offline listening for albums, songs, and video. What about podcasts? Asked everybody in the audience. Well, technology writer, we don't have an answer about that yet. Technology writer Jordan Merrick rounded up some more details that weren't in the WWDC presentation, including the fact that OS X El Capitan will support third-party photo editing tools in the Photos app, and the Maps for OS X app will gain support for transit directions. He has lots more interesting nuggets on his site, which will be in the show notes. And Sunbun submitted this Verge article about Apple's first Android app called Move to iOS. That helps transfer essentials like contacts, messages, calendars, mail accounts, and other media from an Android device to any iPhone or iPad running iOS 9 wirelessly.
So very quickly, don't speak too loud. What was for you the most important portion of the conference yesterday?
It was the iPad getting awesome-looking features that kind of looks like OS X and iOS 9 are going to merge.
Yes, I agree. Finally, we can use the iPad for productivity stuff and working. I think that was tremendous, and I really wish I was here yesterday to discuss it with everyone, but we weren't. So let's move on to Business Insider that has a write-up of a report from The Information which says Facebook had previously unknown plans. Actually, I had heard about those plans to build a satellite which would have provided cheap internet access in the developing world. As it turns out, it's not so cheap to build and launch a satellite. Who would have known? The venture would have cost around $500 million, and so it was canceled all before we ever knew about it. But I just said, I sort of heard about it before. Anyway, Facebook might still continue with its plans to deliver cheap internet via leased satellites.
Yeah, not so good kept secret. To make Twitter conversations easier to follow, Twitter has tweaked how they're shown on the tweet page. Tweets that are part of a conversation are connected by a line. To see more of the replies to a specific tweet within a conversation, you can click View Other Replies. The feature will roll out to all users on Twitter.com today and roll out to mobile apps in the future.
You know, it's really interesting how Twitter has managed to add functionality to its service and to the tweets and embed stuff in the tweets without losing the nature and the shortness and the easiness of the tweets themselves and the service in general. Here, I think it's very useful for logged out users, people who might not even have an account, who can go to a tweet and follow different portions of the conversations. And that could be why they're doing it. I mean, it's going to be useful for everyone, but specifically for maybe Q&As or these kinds of conversations, I think it might be a pretty important, not important, but, you know, interesting step.
Yeah, Twitter's done a pretty decent job slowly introducing these things without changing what Twitter is. I mean, Twitter's done a bunch of jumps around exactly what it is. Before it was like, what are you having for lunch? But they've really done this quite well.
The Los Angeles Times reports that the U.S. FBI wants Congress to expand their authority to tap into secure messaging apps. According to the FBI, Islamic militants and their followers are using instant messaging apps such as WhatsApp and Kik, as well as data-destroying apps such as Wicker and SureSpot. The FBI estimates that about 200,000 people around the world see terrorist messagings each day from Islamic State's zealots, and that the group's recruiters then troll Twitter, Facebook, and other sites to see who is reposting their messages and then invite them to text directly on encrypted or data-destroying apps.
On a lighter note, The Verge reports that starting today, Sony's PlayStation Now game streaming service is available on select Samsung Smart TVs in the US and in Canada. Although you won't need a PlayStation console to play, you will need a DualShock 4 controller. The service will support standard features like trophies, online multiplayer, and cloud-based game saves. Now, PlayStation Now started as an online streaming game rental service, but Sony has since offered a monthly $20 subscription fee option.
And it goes down to $15 if you take a 3 months bundle. It becomes kind of interesting if you can play PlayStation games. Mostly it's PlayStation 3 games, but without even needing a PlayStation. You know, just plug it into your smart TV. You buy a controller. Could be an interesting deal for some people. The latest edition of the Ericsson Mobility Report shows mobile subscriptions in Q1 2015 was at 910 million for all of Africa, including 21 million new subscribers, according to BizTech Africa. The report also indicates smartphone subscriptions will be more than double, reaching 6.1 billion, and that in sub-Saharan Africa, GSM GSM Edge subscriptions will be predominant until 2020.
Dear, go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick comment on this. 2020 seems like science fiction time for those of us who were alive before the year 2000, but it's coming in 5 years, which means in 5 years, sub-Saharan Africa will be predominantly 3G, which means you can do some serious work and serious interneting, which I think is pretty significant, and it will also have a bearing on what we're discussing a little bit later. I thought it was pretty interesting. Africa is getting equipped for general internet purposes through mobile very quickly. So
yeah.
There we go.
I think some of us might be snobs and think, oh, 3G is so slow compared to 4G. 3G is plenty fast for lots of things. Don't forget that. Dear old people like me, TechCrunch reports that messaging app Jot has become super popular in U.S. middle schools. Jot allows users to send private messages on a closed network without a data plan or a Wi-Fi connection. The app uses a mesh network that operates via low-energy Bluetooth or a router within 100 feet of each user. Jot began testing in select middle schools in March, and it blew up.
So I'm not exactly clear on how it works, because if it has a router within 100 feet, it means it uses Wi-Fi, but it's not a Bluetooth router.
Well, it wouldn't need to use that router to get addresses and things. So it's not using it like a hub. So it's a little bit more in the middle.
Yeah, there have been a few mesh networking messaging apps in the past. I guess the combination of Bluetooth and luck made this one blow up. Captain, yes, time for some news from you. I almost forgot to mention that you can help us decide the lineup and the discussions we're going to have on the show by contributing to Reddit. It's very easy. You go to dtns.reddit.com and you upvote, downvote stories. It helps us inform the important stories of the day. Follow the example of Captain Kipper, who sent us this story from GeekWire covering Amazon's push to become an SSL certificate provider by applying to be a root certificate authority. By becoming a root CA, Amazon can sell SSL certificates that are automatically trusted by common web browsers and operating systems. It is unclear how big the revenue opportunity for Amazon is for digital certificates and how aggressively they will market them, but GeekWire seems to think that providing encryption certificates is a natural add-on service for Amazon Web Services, which does make sense.
Now, no word if you have an Amazon Prime subscription if you get free certificates. That was a terrible joke. Anyway, SP Sheridan sent us the Reuters report that the top U.S. tech companies sent a strongly worded letter to President Obama yesterday saying, "We are opposed to any policy actions or measures that would undermine encryption as an available and effective tool." The letter was sent through two industry associations, the Information Technology Industry Council and the Software and Information Industry Association. They represent tech giants you might have heard of, like Apple, Google, Facebook, IBM, and Microsoft. The letter was also sent to other government officials, including FBI Director James Comey, who was like, "Come on, people, I just told you we have a problem with WhatsApp."
Yeah, the never-ending battle between surveillance and privacy. All right, that is the look at the headlines. And we are going to move on to our discussion story, which, did I mention we couldn't discuss the announcements that Apple made? I think I might have. So we're not talking about Apple, mainly because there really wasn't anything new happening in that field. And also, there wasn't a huge amount of major stories that showed up in, the follow-up to Apple's big day, which wasn't so big, I suppose. However, I have had a pretty interesting experience in Finland. Oh, did I mention I'm in Finland? I'm in Finland for a few weeks, and the internet infrastructure in Finland is pretty outstanding, and it led me to rethink about how things have been evolving in the past few years. So let me paint you a picture of how the internet works in Finland in general. I'm not even going to talk about how things are in the main cities, or maybe the one main city of Helsinki. Connectivity is excellent. That is not too surprising. However, in the countryside where I'm currently residing, we're in a house that is pretty remote. You know, it's well away, many kilometers away. That's a portion of a mile for you space measurements people. Um, it's a few kilometers away from the short, the closest village, and it still has a fiber internet connection. And I was very surprised to hear that that was even possible, because not only in the U.S. but also in Europe, I mean in Western Europe, in France, in my case, the fiber connections have been very slow to roll out. ADSL and VDSL have been coming more and more, but fiber isn't really there yet. And here in the countryside, it is very well. What's happening basically is that the government is subsidizing portions of the connection to those remote areas. Basically, they have a deal where they will pay a portion of the connecting cables from a densely populated area to a non-densely populated area. They will pay about 30 to 60% of those cables, and then communities or cities or cooperative associations, however, however it happens to work, will pay for the remainder of that and for the connection to their own house. When everything's said and done, my understanding is that it costs between $2,000 and $3,000 to connect one house. So that is certainly pricey, for sure. But when you think of everything it enables, and I think we're going to discuss this in a little bit, I think it's kind of a interesting deal, especially if you take into account the fact that actually mobile connections are also very well spread in the country. For example, in these kinds of houses, it's not rare at all. So basically, 3G is everywhere. 4G is very common, including in those remote areas. So, and on top of that, what I was telling Tom last week is that the data plans, the mobile plans usually don't have data caps. So what you're paying for is the different speeds, and they go from 50 megabits to 300 megabits. And I'm still talking about 4G now. Of course, it's maximum theoretical speed, but that is the speed you're allowed to get with no data caps. So basically, what it reminded me of was that time when we thought the internet is going to be everywhere and it is going to reshape the geographical distribution of populations and work and have a huge influence on the economy. And that was sort of a technophile's wet dream, even 5 or 10 years ago. Today, though, the internet is so well integrated into our society that we've sort of lost that fantasy, and we're sort of looking, oh, well, who is connected, who isn't, what does the internet work for, what does it not work for? And we're not really paying attention to the fact that if we just buckled up and actually connected everything we could change the way people think about even, working. We've had an issue, at least in France and in Western Europe, with a rural exodus. Villages and small towns don't know how to keep people living in those places. That could be a way to bring back some of those people. I mean, is that something that would speak to you, Iyaz? Would you consider moving to the country if you had a good internet connection?
Well, I'm born and raised a city boy, but I grew up in the suburbs of Queens, which is still city-like compared to a lot of other places. And I have lived in somewhat rural areas. I lived in Vermont. I've lived in upstate New York. And one of the determinations in buying a house upstate was actually if it had fiber to the curb, and it did. So that was relatively helpful. There were other circumstances about the location that said, you know, the fact that they have 3 restaurants and there's nothing to do at night, was it not exactly the best thing for me at the time, and I'm back in the city in New York City now, so I really do enjoy that. But this kind of connection would make so many things more possible, because one of the things about having a good speed somewhere is it's fine for, like, you know, watching video and you want to be able to download audio. That's great. But one of the big things that fiber allows is for things like actually having good upload speed. So if, let's say, Patrick and I want to have a conversation or something, I could see him, I could see his reactions a lot better because I'm sending video back and forth. That's something I think that's been underserved like crazy, particularly just in the United States. Upload speeds nowhere near as good as download speeds for lots of services, and that's supposed to be like, oh, it's okay because you only consume. But the thing is, if you want to create a world, or even the United States, if you want to create an environment where you can have people anywhere, talk to anybody and work with them anywhere, it really does help to have a really solid network, because wired is great. I mean, wireless is very good, but wired fundamentally can be much better because it's not subject to so much more interference. You're not worried about bumping into things, like, okay, there's other airwaves around. So putting this stuff all together, maybe there's a chance I would go to a rural place. That's my long-winded answer.
Well, you know, I think it's when we look at it like this, it's cool that what we think about initially for those very high-speed broadband connections, we think about Netflix immediately. But today, I think a lot of people are thinking, you know, telecommuting is becoming part of the way we look at the workplace, and I'm using air quotes here. More and more people, thanks to the magic of the internet, are just working from home, from anywhere. And you were talking about these the fact that there weren't any restaurants in that area you were looking at. Obviously, it's a vicious circle, because since there aren't any people living there, then the restaurants go away and the businesses go away. But if you can reignite this, as I was saying earlier, a few years ago, the real world and the business world was not used to the idea of doing so much through the internet. I think today a lot of people, and not just, you know, San Francisco hipsters, would consider working from somewhere, you know, maybe even it doesn't have to be the real middle of nowhere. Maybe it could just be a couple of hours away from the city, where you can still go in for a day or two if you really need to, but most of the time you're going to be staying in a larger house and a more comfortable place. There's also another aspect to this, which is spurring businesses through the sole fact that you will have a decent connection. And again, I'm going to turn to the examples I have here in Finland. My wife was telling me about this, what was it, an elk farm or a moose farm or something like that, which actually has something like 5,000 likes on Facebook. And that's the kind of thing that you think, you know, maybe raising elks somewhere in the middle of the country could be, you know, some business venture somehow. But when you think of it with the internet aspect, you can make it into so much more. You get your marketing done for you. You get your you can turn it into an attraction, a tourist attraction. Everything becomes so much easier that it doesn't necessarily have to be, if you work with the internet only. It can enable the kinds of innovation that we've seen in cities like, you know, Uber and Airbnb. These kinds of things are possible because of the internet, but they solve city problems. Maybe we can solve country problems if we connect them.
You know, when you were talking about this whole elk farm or this elk area, I was originally kind of like, who would want to go visit that? And I'm thinking, you know, maybe people wouldn't necessarily want to actually physically travel. But with a good enough internet connection between two different areas, you could upload massive giant VR files so you can have a 360 experience or even a live experience as if you were there. That's something that when you don't think of internet, like, oh yeah, internet's going to give me all of this content and it's going to bring me to other places. But in theory, if you have enough of a pipe, you can basically send every single 360-degree image from one space to the next. That takes a ton of bandwidth. So the more that these places are connected, maybe you sell these tours. Maybe you have it does spur VR actual adoption. Why would you ever need this thing that is attached to your face? Because you want to go places without having to actually go places. So if you can virtually be there, that could be very interesting. Because I'm thinking, hey, if maybe I wouldn't want to go to this elk attraction, but that's because I've never seen it. Maybe I've never experienced it, and I want to get that extra bit. First, I check it out online, because people do this with homes, right? They look at it online, they try to look at the little VR version of it that's on a 2D screen, which is not close to reality. But then eventually you go there to check it out. So it could just be the next level of, or there's maybe an intermediate level between browsing and actually visiting. You go, oh, I saw it on the internet, and I got a really good idea of what it was like.
And for this, you do need a good connection. There's no way around it. And I do think that, we're still, let's say, 30 years into the internet. Within 20 or 30 years extra, it has to become like electricity. And the problem is there are those that are going to be ahead of it, and those that are going to be behind it. And I do worry, it is a genuine, non-political or biased worry, that putting other concerns, it's so essential that putting other concerns before it is misguided. But maybe that's my enthusiasm for all things tech talking. But what do you think? Should we make an effort, and like, how important is it that we actually enable those things? Is it me having wet dreams, or is it actually important?
I don't think you're having wet dreams on this, but I might be a nerd as well. But when it comes to internet, having access is basically having the ability to have knowledge, and that's something, at least in the U.S., we're not actually against. We have libraries everywhere, and when I was living in Vermont, I actually got involved with a political campaign. Very unusual for me, because I'm not exactly an activist. But this guy that was running was trying to actually wire up all of Vermont with fiber. Now, Vermont's basically its own country if you compare it to the rest of the United States. They have like health care for the young and the old. I know, it's really weird. So if you're born there, or you're in pain, or you're old, they'll take care of you. The taxes are very high, but the people of Vermont are like, that's fine. We live here. We're going to take care of ourselves. So it takes a certain kind of mindset to get things done on a certain level. So this has to start on either city level, a state level. Federal, that's usually a lot slower moving. You can get a lot of things moving more within a state first. I think we've seen some progress, not a heck of a lot of progress. The U.S. is a little slow when it comes to adoption of this, because the idea is like, well, the free market will set it up such that the best places either will draw people or they will figure out a solution in the free market. And I'm looking, when you're talking about Finland, taking the time to wire up these places, even though the wireless access is substantially fast. I mean, it's pretty fast compared to other things. It's a long-term thinking of saying, listen, if we invest in our country and we actually bother to do this last mile fiber, this is going to enable a whole future that we might not even be able to imagine yet. So I think sometimes you got to start real small, because the federal level, at least in the U.S., it's very difficult to get that stuff started, let alone finished.
All right, we could talk about this for a lot longer, and we actually jumped over a story about National IPv6 Day in Finland. Again,
Hey.
Finland. I think I'm going to get a check from the Finnish tourist bureau. But yeah, the usual story, IPv4 is saturated, IPv6 is coming, and it's coming not as fast as some might have hoped, but it is. But let's move on to the pick of the day. And I am going to pick my own pick, actually, which I couldn't discuss last week because, ironically, in wonderful Finland that I just spent half an hour complimenting, my internet connection went out in the middle of the show. But my pick was an app called Duet Display for iOS. It works on iPhones and iPads. Sorry, Android or Windows Phone users, it doesn't. There's not a version of this for you guys yet. There are other apps that do almost the same thing, I'm sure. But what Duo Display does is that it serves as you connect your iDevice through USB and USB only, no Wi-Fi, but you can then use it as a secondary screen for your Mac. And the thing is, there are many different apps that do this, but this one does it with almost no lag. And I tried it. It's a little bit pricey, but it does work very well. So I was skeptical that it could have that kind of no lag experience, which is the most important aspect of it. And it does work. So I have no problem recommending it. It's I think $15, but it's available for, as I was saying, iPad and iPhone. I guess iPad is the most useful. It also works on Windows, though. So if you're an iOS user and you have a Windows main computer, it works for you as well. It can be handy in some situations. Messages of the day. We have a message here from Rich from lovely Cleveland, who has thoughts on Apple Music. See, we sprinkled it here and there very discreetly. Esteemed guest hosts, he says, thinking about the Apple Music service as announced, and I started considering that Apple may not need this to initially be massively popular to be successful. This may be a move to deny or simply slow the scaling of other streaming services to profitability. Everyone considers Spotify to be the giant in the space, but to this point, they are not a profitable service. They need to continue their impressive growth to scale to the point where they can be. Apple could win, or at least create a foothold in the space, simply by disrupting Spotify's growth. At this point, their biggest advantage is their convenient and already built into the devices of millions of people are using. And when subscribing to a mobile, that you have a big price advantage. Sorry, I jumbled the phrase there. Basically, what Rich is saying, that Apple having the advantage they have could simply be trying to put a wrench in the shoe of Spotify, in an expression I just made up.
That is one. I guess it's maybe Spotify is a mechanic in this weird metaphor, and so that seems like it'd be totally fitting and not fitting in the shoe. But anyway, I don't know if Apple would be bothering to do something to disrupt a competitor at this point so much as they were trying to figure out a real strategy, because they had so many diverse things. Here's iTunes Match. Here's iTunes Radio. Here's that old regular radio thing. If you go to iTunes, it's actually a little extra radio thing where you can hear FM and AM stations around the world. Then they had Beats. They bought Beats. So like, what are we going to do? So they have this ability to finally make this nice either streamlined version, if you want to call it that way, or they just made this giant ball of services. Here you go. It's 3 different things at once. And yeah, Apple's got a huge advantage. They're pre-installed, and they will be pre-installed on tons of devices, because I think once you go to iOS 8.4, that new music app will show up on the 30th of June, and boom, you have access to that. And they're offering 3 months free. So a lot of people were wondering about the pricing, if Apple was bothering to subsidize the cost of this service to get adoption up there. But that's all speculation, and nobody knows exactly how those deals went down.
Yeah, I have to say, as much as I often agree with Rich from lovely Cleveland, in this case, I don't think they would go through such lengths just to, how did I put it, put a wrench in Spotify's shoe.
Exactly.
I think they're in it to win it. They are definitely, and more importantly, the business of selling music is slowly going away, and this is a big part of what makes Apple and Apple devices successful. So I think they want to stay relevant in that space, and that's their main goal with all of this. Of course, making Spotify less successful is going to be a consequence of this if they succeed, but I don't think it's that way that they looked at it. All right, that is a show. Thanks, Iyaz. How do you think we did? Did we were establishing a scale just before the show started of how many percentiles of a tom we did? Did we do good or not very good? How do you think we did? A quarter of a tom, a third of a tom?
I'm going to say we probably reached at our maximum somewhere about 72% Tomosity, but I think we averaged around 66%. So 2/3, pretty good. I'm going to pat you on the back virtually. Good job. And thanks, Jenny and Roger and everybody putting the show together and having me on today.
Thank you. Is there any way people can find you on the internet?
Yeah, it's a really easy way. Twitter.com/Iyaz, IYAZ. I usually post all kinds of things there, like when I'm on DTNS or when I release a top 5 or do an episode of NetPicks or if I do an episode of Podcast Without Pretense on GFQ Network. All that stuff. It's always on Twitter. If you don't want to hear about any of that stuff, you've made a huge error in following me on Twitter unless you want to learn about beer or other fitness things too, because that's also what I write about on Twitter.
All right, twitter.com/Iyaz. And for me, it's twitter.com/NotPatrick. You can also find my shows about video games, for example. We're going to have a show next week after E3, which is the big Super Bowl of gaming. I'm going to team up with Scott Johnson to do a show after our live streaming of the conferences, and that's at FrenchSpin.com. And a special thanks to the more than 5,000 patrons, 5,065 patrons who support the show, and it was written, and contributors like me, because I do contribute to the show. You can support the show through Patreon or other means, and you can find all of the information at dailytechnewsshow.com/support. Our email address is feedback@dailytechnewsshow.com. You can call us at 512-59-DAILY. That's 512-593-2459. That's complicated to say, and you can listen to the show live at tunein.alphagateradio.com and the website dailytechnewsshow.com. Join us tomorrow when DTNS takes over DTNS. That's right, Scott Johnson is running with it for host the Daily Tech News Show.
This show is part of the Frog Pants Network. Get more at frogpants.com.
Diamond Club hopes you have enjoyed this program.
Great show, everybody. What should we call it?
We should call it the one where Jenny was like, I don't know what's playing right now.
I thought you were trying to play him off.
Yeah, it's like, okay,
No,
it's almost 2.
It's so incredibly awkward when just because of the ducking, when the sound and the person saying the words and the music are in 2 different Google Hangouts. There's no fixing it. Either I cut you off with the music or you cut off. I mean, it just doesn't work. Like, so whoever speaks the magical words that open and close the show, inevitably they have to be the ones to play the music, or else all just heck breaks loose. But there are some good titles. We do have some good titles. Roger, do you want to read these titles while I start the process of the things?
Right,
I will put in my vote for Tinvex one, which I loved.
So at the top at 9 votes is Slow Moving Fiber. Following that is A blank in the blank of Spotify. A lot of these are. So who's WHCTHBD?
That's here.
I don't want to speak French. Fiber important for your internet diet. Twitter tweaks tweets. It's a bit of a tongue twister. Tom is listening. Jot down that note. A show without merit, but with a scarf. Tom's not here. We're finished.
Oh, that's nice.
Oh, but that's so easy. It can't be WWDC Day 2 without Apple clarifications. Tweaking Twitter.
I like 72% Tomosity.
See, I'm trying to find Tim Vex. I do not see him. Oh, there it is. How can you have any data if you don't finish your fiber?
Wow.
Make your pick. I trust anything you say, but I really love the Pink Floyd reference, I have to say.
Number 11 is Slow Moving Fiber, so that's top so far. Gentlemen, decisions.
It's your show. You make the call.
I'm torn between. Was Tom listening?
Yes.
He submitted. Oh God, Tom was listening. Now it's good I didn't know. I would have been mortified. I like Tom's not here. We're finished. Even though you think it's crappy, Roger.
I don't think it's crappy. I didn't say it was crappy. I just said it was easy.
And 72% Tomosity is cool as well. But maybe Tom wouldn't want us to make the title about him.
Mm-hmm.
No, he would not. I can confirm.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would bow to the numbers here. Slow moving fiber. It's got the most votes.
All right. So
That's
slow
what
moving fiber it is.
At number 11, 11 votes, Slow Moving Fiber.
And as your reward for picking that title, you guys now have unlimited, and by unlimited I mean like 10 minutes, time to talk about whatever you want about Apple. So,
dude, this morning I was reading Apple's music page to figure out what happens to iTunes Match. And Apple says it's two different services that are independent.
Lame.
But the thing is, in the same page, the part of the page, on the left side it says that if you don't have songs, if you're a Apple Music subscriber and they don't have songs that you have, you'll upload your files to them. So I don't know how that's not Match, but it's not Match, apparently.
Huh.
So
Interesting.
I can't quite, it's like splitting hairs and I'm trying to figure that out still. Go.
It's probably because they're still working on a business model and they're still kind of making sure, well, maybe we don't want to get rid of this too soon or fold it in because we want to see how the winds blow, so to speak.
Yeah, well, it's $2 effectively a month to have iTunes Match. It's $25 a year. So
yeah, I don't really
be
understand how it wouldn't go away and be, especially since it doesn't make sense. But I'm with Roger on this one. I think they're still figuring everything out.
Oh.
They have no idea what they're doing.
Of course, it's it's Apple's always treated as this kind of monolithic Borg. Like we have this huge elaborate game plan that we're going to go by the numbers, and I think it's actually not like that. I think they have a general direction they want to go, and they need to kind of test and push to see where things will work and where things probably won't work.
It's probably like that. If you're a Match subscriber, you don't have to get Apple Music, and if you're Apple Music, you kind of get Match built in because you're paying them, $10 a month. That's probably why they're separate, so they still have it without it being tremendous. It just seems lame, but whatever.
All I know is I'm waiting for Skylake MacBooks to roll out in the fall. And that's the only thing I care about from Apple. I know it's sad. It's sad.
Which codename is that?
Skylake is the new chipset CPU after Broadwell, and it's the talk portion of Intel's tick-tock map, where talk is a complete architectural change, where tick is just a refinement of an existing process. For example, Broadwell is a tick for the Haswell talk, which basically saw a die shrink. I think it's down to 14 nanometers.
Is it 14 already?
What does Skylake bring that makes it a talk?
So I guess it is. Hold on, make sure this is
it's newer, so Roger wants it.
It's newer, but finally you get. I think it's going to be. This is where DDR4 actually cements itself as a widespread memory technology instead of DDR3, which you've been using for the past 6 years, 7 years. It seems like over a very long time ago. Basically, the biggest advantage, of course, is you get roughly the same performance for a lot less power draw, which means you can make a lot more thinner, amazingly light notebooks, or you can make super powerful laptops that have considerably more oomph behind it. So you could you know, like me, like right now I have a desktop PC which I edit on, and then I have my MacBook which I do all my other work on. It'd be great to have just one machine. Still a pipe dream though. Still a pipe dream.
I think I'm gonna go. It's past midnight here.
What?
Wait, are
Yes.
there werewolves and stuff that rampage across the? Wait, what are the Finnish like scary monster mythologies? Like I know werewolves are like a big Central European thing, but
Yeah, I
for the
don't think
Finns.
they're quite Finnish. Honestly, I don't know.
Are you
Do
saying
do
you're
they
all
have-
finished? You were
I
born
think-
ready and now you're all finished.
Oh, okay. When you put it like that, it does work.
You do need a T-shirt that says that, but you have "Born Ready" on the front, and then
I'm all
unfinished
finished
on the back.
back.
So you could just end the show by turning around.
Well, on that note, what could be a better way than to end the video broadcast? Thank you
Almost
all.
anything.
Almost anything.